Christian Pierce-Sherrod. The CEO and heiress of Harold's Chicken founder Harold Pierce has passed away. She was married and had 5 children. For those who believe that marriage is just a piece of paper, pull up a seat and listen to how that powerful piece of paper could result in a $70 million inheritance, and how this case brings a whole new meaning to where there's a will, there's a way. When people do the most, I do the analysis. Let's go.
Clean. But y'all see this wing right here? When we say we want mouth sauce, this what we talking about. All on there. I ain't got to tell you extra. You just do it.
For generations, Harold's Chicken has become more than just a place to get fried chicken. For Chicagoans, Harold's is culture. It's family. It's neighborhood pride on the South Side. And depending on who you ask, the debate over which Harold's location is the best can get almost as serious as a courtroom argument. But I still put my money on 103rd and Halsted.
The whole city of Chicago said I gotta try Harold's Chicken, man. So I'm gonna let you guys know if it's actually worth the hype or not.
Can I please get a 6-piece chicken wing with mild sauce, salt, pepper, mild sauce? Do I sound like I'm from Chicago? Yep. Yeah.
God, dog, boy, this bag is steaming, coach. Oh my God. Look at that thing right there. Oh my goodness. Y'all ain't what the police want. Ain't no way I'm taking these gloves off right now, but this chicken is looking pretty straight, man, I will say. One thing I will say is this chicken is fresh.
But now, the Harold's Chicken legacy is at the center of an explosive legal battle. And this time, the question's not about who has the best chicken, it's about who will inherit and potentially control a business empire that's valued somewhere between $30 million and $70 million. On one side, you have the 5 adult children of longtime Harold's Chicken CEO Kristen Pierce-Sherrod. On the other side is her husband and widower, Vincent Sherrod. And the legal dispute is now unfolding inside a Will County Probate Courtroom in the state of Illinois. But here's where this story becomes much more complicated than just a simple headline about children fighting their stepdad over an inheritance. Because probate court doesn't decide who's the most deserving. The court doesn't decide who worked the hardest. And they surely don't decide who the public believes should control Harold's Chicken. The court must determine what Christian Pierce-Sherrod legally owned, what belongs to her estate, whether there are valid estate planning documents, and who has enforceable legal rights to those assets. And depending on what the court finds, the answer might not be as simple as the children inherit everything or the husband gets everything. So today, we're going to discuss what we know, what's being disputed, and the major legal questions that the probate court may have to answer. Before we get started, if you enjoy legal breakdowns that explain complicated court cases in plain English, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to Talks with Nikki, and turn on your notifications, because this case is still developing and there's much more to uncover as additional court filings and rulings become public. Now, I have to start by saying this. I live in Illinois, and I grew up on the south side of Chicago eating Harold's Chicken from one of the earlier locations on 47th Street right off Vincennes. So for me, and I'm sure for many of you, this story is personal in a cultural sense. Harold's is one of those Chicago businesses that people connect to memories. You might remember going there after school, stopping by after work, picking up a bucket for the family, or arguing with your friends about which location has the best seasoning and the best sauce. But behind that familiar red and white branding is a substantial business legacy built over generations. Harold's Chicken was founded by Harold Pierce in 1950 and grew from a neighborhood restaurant into a widely recognized brand with locations spreading throughout states. After her father's death in 1988, Kristen Pierce became a major force behind continuing and expanding that legacy. She served as the company's CEO and helped preserve Harold's cultural identity while guiding the business into a new era. Christian Pierce-Sherrod died earlier this year in January at the age of 55 years old. And after her death, questions about the future of the business and who has the legal authority to control her interests became much more than private family matters. It became a probate court dispute. And according to reports, the central conflict involves Kristen's 5 adult children from her first marriage and her husband, Vincent Sherrod, who she married in 2011. But before anyone decide who's right or who's wrong, we need to understand something very important. An inheritance dispute is not automatically the same thing as a dispute over ownership or control of a business. Those are related issues, but legally they can be very different. When someone dies, probate court may become responsible for overseeing the legal process involving that person's estate. The estate can include assets that were owned by the person at the time of death, such as their bank accounts, real estate, personal property, investments, and ownership interests in businesses. But not every asset has to go through probate necessarily. Some property can pass outside of probate because it has a named beneficiary. Maybe it's jointly owned with the rights of survivorship. It could be held in a trust or is structured under some other type of legal arrangement. And that distinction will become extremely important in the Harold's Chicken case. Because when people hear that a family is fighting over a business empire, they think the entire company is sitting inside one estate, waiting for a probate judge to divide it. But that's not usually how the business is legally structured. The Harold's brand might involve multiple different companies, corporate ownership interests, trademarks, licensing agreements, contracts, intellectual property, and the list goes on. The court will have to determine things like what did Kristen Pierce-Sherrod personally own? What did the companies own? What assets are legally part of her probate estate? And perhaps the most important question of all, who has the legal right to inherit or control those interests? Those questions are going to require the court to examine business records. They're going to have to look at ownership documents, estate planning documents, corporate agreements, financial records, and other types of evidence. So when we say who inherits Harold's chicken, that could be oversimplifying things. A more legally accurate question, if you will, would be this: who inherits Christian Pierce-Sherrod's ownership interests and legal rights connected to the Harold's Chicken business? You see, those are not necessarily the same thing as inheriting every Harold's Chicken Shack location or becoming the person in charge of the entire brand. Now let's talk about the family structure. Kristen Pierce-Sherrod had 5 adult children from her first marriage. She later married Vincent Sherrod in 2011. This is what's commonly described as a blended family inheritance situation. And the blended family probate cases can become complicated legally because a surviving spouse and children from a prior relationship may have separate legal interests. But being the surviving spouse doesn't automatically mean that Vincent's going to own everything that Kristen owned. And being Kristen's children doesn't automatically mean that the 5 children are going to inherit or control the entire business. The outcome could depend on several major factors. First, did Kristen Pierce leave a valid will? If there is a valid will, the court's going to begin by examining what that document actually says. A will can identify beneficiaries, explain how assets should be distributed, and name the person who should manage the estate. But even if a will does exist, there can still be disputes. Family members might question whether the document is even valid. They can dispute when it was signed and raise questions about whether Christian had the legal capacity to make the will. The family might claim that somebody exercised improper influence over Christian when she created the document. And let me be very clear when I say this. We should not be assuming at this point that any particular allegation has been proven simply because there's a probate dispute. A family disagreement doesn't automatically establish that there's some kind of fraud taking place. People challenge wills all the time. And challenge to a will doesn't automatically mean that the will is or will become invalid. And a surviving spouse receiving property doesn't automatically prove that there was any type of wrongdoing. Those issues depend on the evidence that'll be presented to the court. Secondly, if there is no valid will, Illinois inheritance law may have to determine how the probate assets are distributed. And this is what's called a dying in estate. Under Illinois law, when a person dies without a valid will in place and leaves behind both a surviving spouse and descendants, the probate estate will typically get divided between the spouse and the descendants. But even that doesn't automatically answer the Herald's question, and here's why. Because the law applies to assets that are actually part of the probate estate. That means the court still has to determine what property belongs in the estate before deciding how the property should be distributed. And if business interests are involved, the court's going to also need to determine exactly what Kristen Pierce-Sherrod owned at the time of her death. Now let's talk about the number that's being debated online. Reports have estimated the Harold's Chicken empire to be worth somewhere between $30 million and $70 million. Now, that's a massive range, but we should be careful not to assume that this means that Christian's personal probate estate has already been officially valued at $30 million, $50 million, or $70 million. A publicly reported estimate of the value of a business's empire isn't necessarily the same thing as a court approved valuation of the deceased person's estate. Those are different things, and let me tell you why. Because the Herald's brand itself could have significant value, and the businesses connected to the brand could have significant value. But Christian's personal ownership interest may only represent a portion of the total value, or it could be structured in a way that requires more legal and financial analysis. The court's going to be using all sorts of resources. I'm talking about accountants, business valuation experts, corporate records, tax documents, and ownership agreements, to name a few. They're going to need to determine what interests existed and what those interests were worth. And that means that the legal fight might not only be about who gets what, but also about what the assets are actually worth. This may be one of the most important questions in the entire case. Even if someone inherits an ownership interest in a company, that doesn't mean that the person automatically becomes the CEO. Ownership and management are not always the same thing. For example, a person can own shares in a company without having the authority to make daily business decisions. A company's governing documents can determine who gets the vote, who can appoint new leadership, and what happens when an owner dies. There could also be agreements that restrict the transfer of ownership or require certain interests to be purchased and transferred in a specific way. So the probate court may have to separate several different inheritance questions, such as voting rights, management authority, and the right to make business decisions, and who has the legal authority to protect and operate the Herald's brand while the estate dispute is pending. Those questions will have major consequences, not only for the family, but potentially for employees, their business partners, licensees, restaurant operators, and the future direction of the Herald's brand. Based on information that's currently available, some of the major legal questions that the probate court will have to address is this. Number one, what estate planning documents exist? Meaning, is there a will? Is there a trust? Or other documents that control how property should be distributed? And are those documents legally valid? Number two, what assets belong to Kristen Pierce-Sherrod personally? A distinction between her personal assets and property owned by separate companies or business entities will have to be made. Number three, what business interests are included in the estate? Meaning, did Kristen own the companies directly? Did she own shares? And did she have rights connected to trademarks, licensing agreements, or other intellectual property? Number four, what rights does her surviving spouse, Vincent Sherrod, have? Those rights could be affected by estate documents, ownership records, Illinois law, and other legal factors. Number five, what rights do Christian's 5 adult children have? Their rights could also depend on the estate documents, the nature of the assets, and whether the property passes through probate. And last but not least, who has the authority to manage or protect the business interests while the legal battle continues? Because listen, a business can't just wait 5 years for a family dispute to be resolved. I mean, bills still got to be paid, and business decisions still have to be made. Like contracts, they still have to be honored, and employees still need direction. So the court may have to address temporary authority in addition to estate administration while the larger ownership questions are litigated through courts. Stories involving family, money, and inheritance can quickly become emotional. So I want to take this time to state that we shouldn't be trying to assume that the children are automatically right because they're Christian's blood family. And we also shouldn't try to conclude that Vincent Sherrod is right because he was Christian's husband. The court will determine that. They'll examine the law and the evidence. And the public won't have access to every document that the judge will eventually consider. So let's not look at this as a story about one side trying to take Harold's chicken away from the other. I know that's how it's being described online, but probate law is far more complicated than that. The children might believe they're protecting their mother's legacy. Her husband could believe that he's enforcing legal rights that come with marriage. And both sides might honestly believe that they're entitled to a particular outcome. That's why the court process matters so much in this case. The probate judge is going to have to determine what the law requires based on the evidence. This case is about more than money. It's about the future of a major Black-owned business legacy. Harold's Chicken began as a local Chicago business and grew into a recognizable brand that became part of the city's identity. And Kristen Pierce-Sherrod spent decades helping carry that legacy forward. But now, a court has to determine how her legal interests will be handled after her death. That's why this case could become an important lesson about succession planning. A successful family business can have enormous value, both culturally and financially. But if ownership, management authority, and inheritance are not clearly addressed, then the death of a key leader is going to create uncertainty, even when the family members all believe they understand what the person wanted. And for those of you watching this case, there may be a larger takeaway. A family business isn't protected from conflict simply because it's family owned. In some cases, the combination of family relationships, money, business ownership, and grief can make the legal issues even more complicated. So, where does this leave us? Well, at this point, the Harold's Chicken inheritance battle is still developing. The central disputes involve Kristen Sherrod's 5 adult children and her widower, Vincent Sherrod. But the probate court will have to answer much bigger questions than simply who gets the money, what rights do the surviving spouse and the 5 children get, and who has the authority to protect and manage the Harold's Chicken legacy moving forward. Because the real battle may not only be about inheritance, it may be about ownership, authority, control, and the future of one of Chicago's most recognizable Black-owned business empires. As more court documents become available, I'll continue following this case and breaking down what the filings actually say without turning allegations into facts before the court has had an opportunity to evaluate the evidence. But now I want to hear from you. If you grew up eating Harold's, tell me in the comments which Harold's location has the best chicken. And are you putting mild sauce on the chicken, the fries, or both of them? If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who can use this message. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and leave a comment down below letting me know your thoughts. Should a family business automatically stay with the founder's children, or should a surviving spouse have equal rights to the legacy built during the marriage? Meet me in the comments. We can continue the conversation there.